Hey everyone, this is a video about Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic poem, The Raven, which we didn't have time to get to in class a couple of weeks ago when we were scheduled to, but which I know a lot of you really enjoyed because of your posts on discussion board, and I want to talk a little bit more about the poem so that you have some background in it, so that you understand it a little bit more deeply and hopefully can enjoy it more. So just very briefly, to remind you, Poe is writing in the Romantic period. We group Poe sort of with the dark romanticists, Melville and Hawthorne. I mean, those are sort of not particularly useful terms, mostly because Poe is kind of doing his own thing. But he is obviously not invested in the sort of optimism around American literary nationalism as some other writers are. He's not particularly interested in nature. He's not really interested in any kind of American, specifically, project at all. He is very much a romantic insofar as his work is marked by emotion. He's really subverting rational thought, uninterested in rational thought, and much more interested in an experience of reality that is emotional and irrational and intuitive, and often a little insane, in fairness. So he is a Gothic writer. When we talked about Fall, the House of Usher, we discussed sort of characteristics of Poe's fiction. Those things also apply to his poetry as well. Just a reminder on the Gothic, it is a form that values terror. It sees terror, it sees fear as a way of unleashing kind of dammed up imaginative resources, both for reader and for writer. The Gothic is characterized by an aura of gloom, terror, and mystery. It is marked by its use of the uncanny or unheimlich. That's a German word. The uncanny is sort of the familiar unfamiliar, the thing which we think we know, which we recognize as something from our daily lives, and yet upon closer examination, further inspection, reveals itself to be in some unsettling and unnameable way very different and terrifying and frightening. You find that a lot in Gothic literature. Exotic settings of both time and place we find a lot in the Gothic. Macabre or violent events that cannot be hidden or rationalized despite the best efforts of the narrator in fiction or the speaker in a poem. Also this sense of an inability of characters and speakers in Gothic literature to repress the past or a hidden narrative, a hidden sort of sense, a series of events that are somehow troubling or dangerous or somehow pose danger to the speaker. They desire to repress these things and yet cannot, and those things tend to crop up and trouble or in some way destroy even the speaker or the narrator or other characters in that literature. So think about how in The Fall of the House of Usher, Roderick Usher has prematurely entombed his sister, and the guilt, he's already on shaky footing sort of mental health wise, and then at his guilt over having entombed her prematurely leads him into madness, and then sort of the reality of that action bursts forth onto the scene when Madeline herself reappears and sort of crushes him and they both die. So that is sort of a vivid example of the way the past or events or behaviors from the past always come back, resurface in Gothic literature. And we see that very much in The Raven. So I want to just go through the poem and talk about it with you. Page 735 of your Norton. The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, So right there in the first two lines of the poem, we have a speaker who is not in a good way. He is weak and weary. The setting, a midnight dreary. In the next stanza, he's going to tell us it's in bleak December. It's not a lovely March afternoon when the temperature's high and sun's out. It's a gloomy, frightening setting, and our speaker is not settled. He's not in a good way. Back to that first stanza. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. 'Tis some visitor, I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. So here we have our speaker. We know that he's weak and weary. We know that he is not well. Here's a tapping at the door, and what is his response? To try to calm himself and say, "'Tis some visitor, only this and nothing more. It's nothing to be frightened of." Well, why would the speaker need to reassure him of the sort of benign nature of the visitor if he were not fearful of it being something else? So our speaker is afraid, is anticipating something bad or problematic right from the first stanza of the poem. Second stanza, he sort of backtracks and tells us, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December. From my books, vainly I had tried to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. Well, let's spend a little time here. So our speaker tells us that he's seeking in vain to get relief from his sorrow by reading books. And the thing that he is seeking relief from, the sorrow, is the maiden, sorrow for the lost Lenore. The radiant maiden, nameless here forevermore. The lost Lenore. Not the dead Lenore, not the abandoned Lenore, she is the lost Lenore, perhaps dead, but perhaps misplaced somehow. We don't know if Lenore is alive or dead. We don't know what her status is. All we know is that our speaker is in sorrow over her loss. She's gone. And then that last line 10, 11, 12, nameless here forevermore. Why would Lenore be nameless? Why is her name one that we cannot speak? Why would she be nameless? It's an odd description for Lenore. Whatever her condition, we know that our speaker is tormented by the thought of the lost Lenore. Skip down page 736, the third stanza on that page. He hears something out in the hallway, goes to the door, deep into that darkness peering. Long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word Lenore. Merely this and nothing more. So it is the speaker himself who whispers the word Lenore. Lenore, is it you? Why would you ask if it is Lenore in the hallway if she is either undead, somehow not dead, or if we are looking for her ghost? Either way, it is the speaker who introduces the character of Lenore as perhaps lurking outside somewhere. It is he who is troubled by the thought of Lenore and her possible presence, her unsettled presence. And then the speaker hears a tapping at the window, goes to the window, opens it up. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. So that raven somehow coming out of the past, a figure from the past. Not the least obeisance made he, not any sign of obedience or recognition of my greater status. Not the least obeisance made he, not an instant stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, with an expression of a lord or lady, with a regal or a lordly look on his or her face, a look of authority, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more. So if you know your Greek mythology, you know that Pallas Athena is the goddess of wisdom, and our speaker has a bust of Athena, a statue, from the chest up of Pallas Athena. The bird flies in and perches atop her, thus symbolizing the raven's dominance over rational thought, right? That this figure is going to dominate or even eradicate irrational thought by its presence. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. So he smiles at the bird. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven. You are a regal bird, you're not a craven bird. Ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore, tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. So the raven will not give its name. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no sublunary being, no creature on this earth, ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. So never has this happened to anyone before, that a bird styling himself Nevermore has come in and sat on a bust above your door. This is the first time anything like this has ever happened. We're in new territory here. Page 737. Wondering at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store. So this word nevermore is the only thing the bird can say. Next stanza 3 on page 737. So our speaker is trying to comfort himself with the thought that this word nevermore has no specific meaning. It's just the only thing the bird knows how to say. And he wheels his cushion in front, his chair in front of the bird, to think about what it could possibly mean, what it could represent. Next stanza 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by angels whose faint footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, cried I, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee. God has sent you somehow to torture me. Respite, and Nepenthe, from thy memories of Lenore. Nepenthe, a drink, as your footnote tells you, that induces oblivion. Please, free me from my thoughts of Lenore. Let me quaff this kind Nepenthe and forget this lost Lenore. Let me no longer think about Lenore. Free me from thoughts of Lenore. But the bird replies, nevermore. And so our speaker cannot free himself of thoughts of Lenore. He cannot get the bird to stop speaking the name Lenore, speaking the memory of Lenore. He is tortured by her presence, by the memory of her. Bottom of page 737. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aiden it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. So he's asking, will Lenore be in Aiden, this imaginary place, this imaginary heavenly place? Will Lenore find respite there? Will she find peace there? And the raven says to him, no, she won't, nevermore. And so our speaker in the last stanza The raven does not leave. It never goes away. It remains there, croaking at him, terrifying him. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. So our speaker then is haunted by either guilt over his perhaps having murdered Lenore, her perhaps having killed herself as a result of something that he has done or something that's happened in their relationship. And the raven comes to break through his desire to repress this feeling about Lenore and unleash it upon him. And ultimately, it drives him into madness. And I am out of time, and that is The Raven. Happy to talk further about it in class. Bye, guys.